Welcome back to Tiny Grimes Games. Last week I had the pleasure of playing 5 digital games all week: Infinity Wars, Hex, Hearthstone, Solforge, and War of Omens. It was a great week. I got to see, for the first time, I got really involved in some of these games. For other games, it was more showing them to the people who watch my stream. But overall, it was a great week. And so today, my goal is to take these experiences and quite a bit of additional research in order to bring you a roundup of these 5 games. What I'll be doing is ranking each of these games in order over a wide range of categories. So let me start by saying this. We seem to be entering a bit of a golden age of gaming. Each of the games I'm going to look at today has a lot to offer, and all of them are enjoyable. So while they'll be ranked and one has to be first, one has to be last, all of these games are a lot of fun. I don't think you're going to go wrong with any of the games if you choose them. So my goal today is to help you determine which one of these games might be best for you, which might be best suited towards your needs and tastes. Before beginning, I also need to offer up a couple of caveats to this ranking. One, most of what I'm going to say today is subjective in nature. Therefore, you may strongly disagree with me, and I understand that. It's fine. Hopefully not so much that you want to track me down and punch me in the gut, but I understand how frustrating it can be when someone says something negative about a game that I love. So all of the negative statements that I will be making should be taken in the context of they are subjective, and more importantly, most of them will probably be changed, as all of these games are in beta, and in fact, Hex is still in a closed beta where they're giving away beta keys. The second caveat is that I'm not an expert in all of these games. I am a top-level Solforge player, and I am quite proficient at Hearthstone, but I'm really a neophyte when it comes to Infinity Wars, Hex, and War of Omens, though I must say I've been enjoying them all since I started playing them. So let's get on to the roundup. So the first category we're going to look at today is innovative. And what I mean by this is which of these games is really doing something that is sort of interesting and new. Maybe it's been done before, but they're doing it in a new way. And for me, the most innovative of these games is Solforge. I consider Solforge to be the most innovative, and really, innovation is the name of the game. Resources? What resources? We don't need any resources. We just play cards. Every time you play a card, they improve. The deck reshuffles every 4 turns. You get these cards back. They look different the second time around. This really is a game like no other. As one who has actually played this game for over a year now, I often forget how truly remarkable and game-changing this game actually is. It can be quite easy to forget as you just get into the game, and this is just a normal game like any other. But when you sit down and think about it, it's quite different. Next for me is War of Omens. War of Omens is a game that when you first look at it, it's a little bit confusing. You build this deck, it's only 10 cards, and then cards come up on the side, and they're always changing what cards you can buy. Because really what you're working with here is a combination of a deck builder like Dominion or DC Deck Builder meeting a trading game where you make your own lineup of cards to choose from. And I haven't seen anything like this before in card game form, especially online. Not to mention, most of the duplicates of cards you own are not actually worthless. You open a new copy of that common that you already have, your 100th copy, well, guess what? You can use that to upgrade your old copies of cards, which is very innovative. If I had to compare this to a game, I'd say it's actually sort of like Marvel Dice Masters right now, where you have the idea of you are building your deck ahead of time, but it's a deck builder type of game when you get into the game itself, which is a very interesting combination. For me, third in this category would be Infinity Wars. Infinity Wars is also quite innovative, where rather than just having a field of play, there's actually 2 fields of play. Your attack zone and their attack zone, and you can defend or attack. But more importantly, you don't take turns where you go back and forth. Infinity Wars, it's actually a bluffing mechanic where I put guys in, you put guys in, and we try to figure out from there who's going to do what. And this bluffing mechanic is quite innovative and interesting. Where should you put your guys? Where's your opponent going to put their guys? I don't know. anything could happen. Next for me is Hearthstone. Hearthstone is not incredibly innovative. I mean, it's a fairly straightforward game, but there are some small innovations. For instance, there we're able to take a game, much like Solforge, where you take turns playing without having some sort of windows that you have to pass through, which can be burdensome in some other games, but they allowed you a little interaction with your opponent through the mechanics of secrets. There's also some cool moves where you can play cards that will actually copy cards in your opponent's deck to put them in your own deck or in your own hand. And you have the hero powers, which are somewhat innovative as well. Finally, I would put Hex on the bottom of innovative, but that's really for now. I feel like Hex is a game which is very much in the early stages and in flux. While we've seen the PvP side of Hex, we haven't actually seen the side that will be most innovative, which is the player versus environment, raids, guilds, these kind of aspects. We've really just seen the most simple part of Hex, and in that way, it's not very innovative, as it's somewhat derivative of Magic the Gathering, so much so that there's actually an impending lawsuit over the matter. Although in other ways it is innovative in taking parts of Magic and improving them and changing them. I think for many, this is actually a positive. They like the fact that there is a game that is very similar to Magic that can be played online, that doesn't have to be played on the Magic online system. So for many, the fact that it is not entirely innovative is probably a plus. Okay, let's move on to the next category. Next, we're going to look at what I call going digital, and that is, how much do these games embrace the digital aspect? In other words, could you just basically make this game on paper and have it function exactly the same? Or does the digital component of this game actually play a large part in the process? For me, Solforge is the pretty clear winner here. This game would be impossible to play on paper. Life totals are ever shifting. Health and attack values on the cards on the board are ever shifting. Your deck is changing every time you play a card. I mean, if you wanted to do this on paper, you would have to have some sort of card that could flip over multiple times. You have to be subbing in new cards. Cards would be coming out. It would be very difficult to track all of this in a paper format. I would say very similar to that statement goes with Infinity Wars. It would also be quite hard to mimic these mechanics on paper of being able to have a purely bluffing game. There are some games out there where there are bluffing mechanics and components, but to take each of your guys and every turn be able to move them to a different part of the field, it would be very difficult, I think, to replicate that via paper. Next would be Hearthstone. Hearthstone has much of Hearthstone would be very easy to replicate on paper. But things like pulling a card out of your opponent's hand at random with them not knowing what it is, copying it, and putting it in your deck would be nearly impossible to be able to replicate on paper. You could do a mechanic where you copy the card, but it wouldn't be able to be a situation where your opponent doesn't know what it is, which makes that mechanic all the more interesting, especially when you're pulling two cards out of their deck. If you don't know what cards your opponent pulled out of your deck, and you know your 30-card deck, there's a lot of choices there that they could have pulled. Did they pull your giant Ragnaros, or did they pull your 1/1 curve filler? Could go either way. For me, number 4 in going digital is Hex. Hex, in many ways, like Magic, could quite easily be played on paper. But it does have a number of different elements that would be much harder to emulate on paper. So you have a situation where you have gems that you're putting in cards. And yes, you could represent this with tokens. And you have other cards that if you worded them differently could be done on paper, such as, play a card, it improves all other copies in your deck. But overall, it would be somewhat burdensome to be able to play this on paper, and therefore it is embracing the digital aspect to some degree. And again, this is looking at Hex in its current form. Where it's going with some sort of PvE situation with guilds and raid bosses, I think it's going to be embracing the digital aspect much more. Last in this category, I would put War of Omens, and essentially it feels to me like War of Omens could easily be printed as a paper game. The only aspect that you would miss is the upgrade mechanic on cards. You wouldn't be able to do that interesting collectible nature of the game. You would have to find some other way of handling that, and probably you just wouldn't have the upgrading mechanic, and you would just have people have piles and piles of the same common, which would, make some people sad, but it would work. Okay, so let's take a look at the next category, which is going to be the user interface. User interface is an interesting category because on one level, once you love the game, as long as it is functional, it's really sort of an irrelevant topic. But on the other side, it's quite relevant when you talk about getting new players to play your game. And I think most would agree that the number one choice here has to be Hearthstone. The polish in Hearthstone is phenomenal. It's basically this beautiful overlay that when you load it up, it just feels right. And I got to admit, when I heard that each card had a catchphrase, I cringed and said, that is going to be the most annoying thing in the world after 1,000 plays. But you know what? Somehow it's not. I still enjoy the catchphrases when I play these cards. I don't know if they did so much work to just find the right catchphrase, or if I'm just a glutton for punishment and I like hearing the same phrase over and over again. I don't know how they did it, but Hearthstone has definitely demonstrated just how powerful a good UI can be. As whenever people compare Hearthstone to other games, you might say something like, well, Hearthstone doesn't seem to have quite as much depth as X game, and the immediate comeback is always, have you played Hearthstone? The UI is so good, I can't believe it. I can click on buildings and break windows while I wait for my opponent to play. Now an experienced player in the game might say, I don't really care. I care much more about depth. But certainly bringing in new players, it's very nice to have a solid UI. For me, number 2 is War of Omens. The overall polish of this game is rather impressive for how early it is in the development compared to other games on the list. In fact, I would almost say the polished UI is kind of a problem, as crazy as that sounds, because when you first load this game up, you see this really polished, what looks like a final product, and you start playing it, and it's amazing, and then you start to realize it's missing that? It's missing that? What's going on? And then you look and you say, oh, wow, this game is brand new. But it sort of tricks you into thinking that it's very near the end of its development, much like Hearthstone appears. But in fact, War of Omens is very early in its development. I'd say the third best UI out of these games is Infinity Wars. It has a very clean and functional UI. I personally find it somewhat unattractive, but that is a very subjective statement. I think overall it is very functional. It looks good. It looks like it has a high production value, whether or not I love the actual look of it. For me, number 4 is Solforge. And Solforge has been widely maligned for its, some people say bad UI. Maybe I would say a not new-looking UI. It looks like maybe it was programmed in about 1998. And one of the reasons is because it has to be able to function on iPad, iPhone. It needs to have a very clear board. There's nothing going on this board, and I like that. It's a very simple board. And in some ways it can be a positive. It can also be viewed as a negative in being too simplistic. And for me, the bottom slot goes to Hex. And some of you may disagree with that because Hex has quite an elaborate UI. But for me, the user interface is actually too elaborate. There's too much going on. Hex is, the first time I looked at the UI for Hex, I think I almost had a seizure. There were so many things blinking and bipping, and you go to attack and flames come up on the screen. And while it's kind of cool looking to have all of these different things happening, and there's all these little icons that don't even do anything. They're just for show, and it's just too much in my opinion. And this again is subjective, and you may be looking at me like I'm insane and say, this is the greatest UI ever. But I'm not a fan of it. Also, the screen is zoomed way out, so in order to see anything, You really have to click on cards, which can be a bit burdensome at times. And all the pass windows are quite double-sided, right? So on the one side, the passing windows are so needed to be able to add the depth that this game is going for. But on the other side, they're a pain. Having to click through all these pass windows when you're on a time clock. And like I had a situation recently where I hit spacebar for the other pass window, but it somehow skipped the pass window for my deploying phase. And I didn't get to play any guys that turn. And those kind of problems can become very frustrating when they come up. And I'm sure it'll be smoothed out a bit more as we get closer to an open beta. But for now, I would say for me, Hex takes the bottom slot for user interface. Okay, so next on the list is depth of the game. And for me, this is really the only category that even matters. Your game can look amazing. It can have all the cards available freely. Everything's perfect, but if there isn't depth to the game, it's not going to be enjoyable. And for me, this is one of the places where Solforge excels most. Solforge is very interesting because on the surface, it looks so simple. You play 2 cards, you try to kill their guys, you hit battle and you move on, and then they try to kill your guys. But what this game really is a balancing act of trying to play both the board for your current spot in the game and playing for the late game. And in fact, it's possible to lose the game on, say, turns 1 and 2 because you have leveled the wrong choices. If you misjudge the matchup and you level the wrong cards, as the game progresses, you're actually winning. You look like you're winning, but a good player looks at this and goes, that person's going to lose. They leveled the wrong cards. And sure enough, as level 3 comes back around and your opponent levels all the correct cards, he makes this comeback that shouldn't have happened in your eyes, but really everyone else knew it was going to happen from turn 2. The depth in Solforge is quite phenomenal. For me, next is Hex, and it is because of the passing window. So while the passing windows can look burdensome to someone watching and can be a real issue while you're playing, they are what allow you to have incredible depth in the game because you can always interact with your opponent's doing. Every little thing they do. They deploy a guy, boom, I'm going to interact with that. They play a spell, interact with that. You can interact with everything, and it allows you to take actions at any point during your opponent's turn as well, which is quite powerful. Third for me is Infinity Wars. Infinity Wars has quite a bit of depth in their simultaneous turns and bluffing. It increases. It provides an opportunity for all kinds of interesting decision points and gameplay. Number 4 is Hearthstone, which for me, Hearthstone doesn't feel like it has a lot of depth. And I'm sure people are going to violently disagree with me here, but I call Hearthstone my cotton candy game. It tastes great for a little bit, but after a while, I just can't seem to enjoy playing it anymore. Every month, the new ladder comes up, and I vow, this will be the month I hit Legendary. I play for about 2 hours, win most of my games, and say, this game is just too shallow. Every game kind of feels the same. There just isn't a lot of depth. I'm hoping that much needed new cards will help solve this issue, but the card interactions are fairly simplistic and straightforward. Much of the game is, I play a guy, you play a guy, let's trade, I'm going to have my guy survive, and now I have an advantage. And so, while this seems like it's a negative, for many, this lack of depth in Hearthstone is actually a great boon. For instance, I have a friend who we were talking about digital card games, and I said, hey, do you play any of these games? And he said, I love Solforge. I love Hearthstone. It's by far my favorite. I looked at him funny and said, really? Why is that? Knowing that he loves in-depth card games. And he said, well, because I only have about an hour a week to play digital card games, and so this is perfect for me. I can fire it up for an hour, have fun, be fairly successful, and then move on with my day. And if that's your goal, Hearthstone is certainly a great option. It seems to me that War of Omens takes the 5th spot for depth. And this may be more my own ignorance of not being as good at the game yet and not quite understanding all the nuances, but there doesn't seem to be a great depth of gameplay. Now, this doesn't mean it's not a fun game, as I enjoy the game quite a bit, but I enjoy it sort of on a different level. When I'm looking for a high-depth game, I'm probably playing Solforge or Hex. If I just want to, take a break for 5 minutes and do something, I love firing up War of Omens, play a game in 5 minutes, move on with my day. It's a lot of fun. Okay. Next is new player experience. So this is an important element of any game. How do these games interact with new players? This is especially important for you. If you are watching this video, you haven't played any of these games before, and you're wondering, which is the game for me? So first place seems to go to Infinity Wars. And it's kind of interesting. I didn't assume that this would be the case. The game is so innovative and complicated and interesting with bluffing and different lanes and all these different weird aspects of the game that no other game has. You would think it would be impossible for a new player to get in. But in fact, there are these wonderful tutorials and a campaign mode that really get the player into the game. And not only that, provide them with a whole lot of cards. So you come out of these tutorials and campaigns with a deck that you at least feel like is a functional deck. Number 2 for me is Hearthstone. Hearthstone just does an amazing job of just letting you start the game and play. I talked to somebody about this list and I made this claim. They said, "Are you crazy? Hearthstone doesn't have a tutorial. Hearthstone doesn't have a campaign. Hearthstone doesn't do anything for you." Do you know what? Hearthstone is so beautifully designed, you don't need that. You just fire it up and start throwing guys to the table and you figure it out as you go. Alright, number 3 is War of Omens, because War of Omens also has a tutorial / campaign mode, gives the player a starter deck, and you're on your way. The game is unique, so it's kind of confusing at first, but this tutorial does actually help you sort of plot out how you're going to start playing this game. Number 4 for me is Solforge. This is one of the problems of Solforge right now, is that it doesn't have a campaign mode yet. And like all the games on this list, it is in beta mode, and it's certainly not the time to judge the end result of a game. That'll be another video in the future. But for now, there's no campaign mode. A new player does get 2 starter decks, but there isn't an active means of holding a new player's hand through how the games work. And really, what happens is you get a lot of new players who start beating the computer by just playing the board as it is, and then when they start playing better players, they are very confused and frustrated because they think the game is very simple when in fact the game is very complex, and it becomes a bit of an issue. And in 5th place is Hex. And remember, this is just for now. This is a closed beta. But Hex almost seems to go so far as to tell new players to buzz off. They don't make any attempt at engaging a free-to-play audience, as the game is not free-to-play. There are no tutorials, really. There are all these pass-and-play options that are easily clicked through unintentionally. And while these elements are probably coming later to really bring new players in, you really need to make a big effort to be able to play Hex. You either figure it out on your own and struggle greatly, or ask around and hope to find the right person to sort of show you around. And so what I would suggest, if you're going to play Hex, go watch some streams. Infamous Neo is a really good streamer, a smart guy who will help sort of walk you through what's happening. It's almost a necessity if you're going to play Hex to come in with research, whereas the other 4 games, you can just kind of roll in the door and say, "Hey, what do you have to offer me? I'm here. I'm ready to learn." Hex is like, "You ready to learn? Too bad. We're not ready to teach you." But I think that is going to be coming soon in the future. Okay, next we'll move to free-to-play. So for some of you out there, you're going to say, free-to-play? Free-to-play for chumps. I come bringing my wallet. Other people are going to say, free-to-play is what I can do. If I'm going to play an online game, I'm going to play it free-to-play. I already play Magic in person. That's where my money goes. I need a fun game I can play free-to-play. And this one is a little bit trickier because most of them do offer pretty good options for free-to-play. But I think I would have to put War of Omens first for free-to-play because it's really easy to grind and get packs. You get in-game currency very, very quickly by playing just the AI and grinding out games against them. However, if you want to get to the top level, that is another story, right? So free-to-play, I sort of consider you want to get in the game, you want to be competitive, but you're not trying to be champion as a free-to-play player quickly, at least. You know it's going to take you quite a while if you want to try to do it free. So you're going to get a lot of product pretty quick, but with the way the game works with upgrading cards, it's going to take a long time to get to the highest upgraded cards. Also, there's a price wall on unlocking the better pack. So while you may get the currency to be able to unlock that level 2 pack or that level 3 pack, unless you put a certain amount of money in the game, which is frankly not that much. I think it's $5 and $10 respectively to unlock these packs, you won't actually be able to purchase them. Second for me is Solforge. Solforge does a really good job at giving you a lot of free stuff every day. You log in, you get something free. You win some games, you get some more free stuff. You're going to get a free ticket every day, which lets you enter tournaments when you save up a couple of them. And in addition to that, there is a low-cost, good metagame deck in a Yeti deck that's really cheap and easy to acquire and quite powerful. And so as a free-to-play player, you know, if you look around a little bit and you realize this is what you should be shooting for, you can get to a point fairly rapidly where you're able to have a competitive deck, and then you can take that into tournaments and grind out more and more cards. So it works out quite well. For me, number 3 is Hearthstone. And really, it's because of the Warlock Zoo deck. I feel like it saves Hearthstone. It's a deck that has no epics or legendaries. It's gotten me to rank 4 on the ladder with very little time invested. It's a solid, strong deck. You can stop by my stream sometime if you want to see the deck in action. I'll show you the list. However, let's move on to if you don't want to play a cheap deck. If you want to have a large collection, it is a long, slow grind. In fact, it's so long and slow, I vowed I'm not putting any money into Hearthstone. After about a month, I was like, alright, if I'm going to play Hearthstone for real, I got to have a deck. The metagame is ever shifting. You really, well, at least it was before, you had to be able to have access to a wide range of the legendary cards, or at least the epics, to be able to round out these different deck types. And so because of that, Hearthstone is sort of in the middle. Next is Infinity Wars. You do get a lot of free stuff up front, but once you hit a certain mark, you acquire infinity points really slowly, and these points are what allow you to buy packs, and packs cost a ton. So I don't know enough about the metagame to be able to tell you if you can build a really inexpensive deck quickly and have something that's really strong or not. But the bottom line is, it is fairly pricey to really get going into the game. Next up on my list is Hex. Hex is last because, well, to be perfectly honest, it's not free to play. At least not in the parts that have been developed. It's kind of funny because when you log into Hex and you kind of look around and you go, I don't understand. I don't get any free cards. I don't get anything for logging in. I've gotten kind of used to that. Every other game has that. And then, you know, you go into the chat and you go, how do I get free cards? And everyone kind of slams you simultaneously and goes, do you get free cards in Magic? I didn't think so. So basically, they are emulating Magic here. Hex does not pretend to be free to play. It's not free to play. You're a free to play player. Move along. We ain't interested. Now, admittedly, the PvE version that is coming has said that it will actually have free to play elements in it. So if you're looking to play Hex purely free to play, you may just want to watch some streams for now, kind of get to know the cards a little bit, and wait until the new elements are put into the game, because right now it's not an entirely viable option. Alright, trading, auction house, and crafting. Most of the games have some aspect of this already in place. I'm going to put Infinity Wars first because Infinity Wars has trading. To me, trading is probably the most important element of these three. Crafting is really important for being able to make your own cards, but there's nothing more frustrating than having 5 copies of the best card in the game and none of all these other cards, and knowing you can get these cards, or better yet, a friend saying, hey man, I got 12 of every card, I would give you a whole playset of the whole game that we could trade. I'm sorry, we can't trade, I can't give you anything. Infinity Wars is the only game out of these 5 that currently has trading. And remember, this is a category, maybe more so than any of the other ones, that is really about what is currently in the game. Because as these games progress, Solforge has said they'll have trading, Hex has said they'll have trading. these things are coming. But currently, Infinity Wars has it. No one else does. Hex number 2 here, because Hex does have an auction house right now. So if you can't trade, at least you can have an auction house. At least you can have a way to acquire literally any cards you want. You don't have to randomly open packs. You can just go to the auction house, buy cards. Better yet, you can go and sell cards. So it's a much easier way to go infinite if you can do well in a tournament and then just go sell your excess for full value. And as I said already, Hex will have trading, and so they'll be rounded out as they move forward. I put Solforge next because while Solforge does not have an auction house or trading yet, it does have crafting. So by having, as they call it, forging, by having a way to take cards that you have that are extras and turn them into other cards, even if it is at a fairly less than satisfying exchange rate, at least you can do it, right? It's not the same as being able to trade them. That would be better. But at least you can take your excess cards and turn them into something else, which is important. I put Hearthstone 4th here because Hearthstone also has crafting, but it doesn't have anything else on the agenda. The thought is it's only going to have crafting. It's not going to have trading. It's not going to have an auction house. That's the only thing that's going to be available in the game. And last, for now, is War of Omens because it has nothing. It's very early in its stages, but it doesn't have any sort of trading. It doesn't have any sort of auction house. And it doesn't really need crafting because you take all your excess cards and you just instantly upgrade them. But it's interesting. There's no real way to take the cards you have and move them around. Okay. Next category is somewhat interesting. It's called skill mitigating cost. And what I mean by this is there a way in the game to be able to use your skill to overcome the cost of the game? In all of these games, you can just spend piles and piles of money, be terrible at the game, and have a full collection. And that's good. That's a good thing. But more important to a lot of people who would go so far as to watch a video like this is to know, is there a mechanic in your game that will allow me to overcome that and to use my skill to get a full play set rather than just have to buy everything? And there definitely is in nearly all of these games. Solforge does a great job of this because you can mitigate the cost by your own skill via draft, via constructed tournaments, whatever format you are better at, you can go infinite and build an entire collection. I know that's how I built my Solforge collection. I'm a better constructed player than draft player, so I just play constructed queues. Whenever a new set comes out, play constructed queues, build my collection that way. Number 2 is Hex. Hex also has drafting and constructed queues, which net more packs, which can be sold on the auction house to buy individual cards or open to complete your collections. Either way, basically skill in this game will allow you to go infinite and will mitigate all your costs. So for both of these games, as long as you're good at them, you'll be on your way. Infinity Wars has a drafting mechanic as well, and at the higher levels, this is extremely lucrative. You can get just piles and piles of free stuff by winning hordes of games. But it's very difficult to win enough games in a draft to get all the cards you drafted for free. Otherwise, what you normally end up doing is taking a more moderate level of skill to very, very slowly build your collection, which is also useful as well. Pretty much the same could be said for Hearthstone. And this is kind of an issue for Hearthstone. If you're happy drafting, you can draft over many, many drafts and slowly acquire a collection through skill. This was my plan originally. I got to a point where I was going infinite in drafts, but drafts take a long time. You had to win then 10 games. Now you can go all the way up to 13, and it takes an hour or 2 per draft, and you end up getting one pack, usually full of worthless cards that you then craft down to get a tiny bit of dust. It can be a really, really long, slow process to try to grind out your collection through skill. It can be done, but it's a slow process. And War of Omens also has sort of the same situation where, like I said already, it's really easy as a new player to grind out a whole bunch of low-level packs. And so in some ways, War of Omens could go at the top of this list because you are going to be able to use your skill to very quickly get piles and piles of cards. The problem is because there is that price wall built into the game where you cannot actually even purchase the second and third levels of the packs, I put it on the bottom because you can't actually use your skill to mitigate that wall. You're going to have to pay some money at some point if you want to get all the cards. Technically, from the lowest level packs, you can get epics, but that would be a very, very long process to try to use your skill to just grind that out all day and all night. Okay, next category, I said depth was the most important. Perhaps for me, the second most important is this category. Organized play is absolutely critical for someone like me to a game. Now, admittedly, I'm kind of a psycho. I'm in these games for the competitive element. So for some of you, this category may be completely meaningless, but for me, it's important. There needs to be some sort of carrot at the end of the stick. There needs to be some way for me to scratch that competitive itch, or I'm just going to move on and do something else that will allow me to satisfy that issue of my crazy brain. So for me, number one is Hearthstone, and this is why I play Hearthstone. To be perfectly honest, I don't love Hearthstone. I already told you I don't think it has a lot of depth. You know what it does have? A ladder. It has an amazing ladder that every month they update. It's a new carrot that keeps you going. How good are you at Hearthstone? Well, you're going to know soon enough. Climb the ladder. When you get to Legendary, that will give you an exact number of where you rank in the world in Hearthstone. Oh, very satisfying. Not to mention, there's a $100,000 tournament coming up, and many community-run tournaments are going on every single night. So if you're interested in playing a competitive game that has really good organized play, I think Hearthstone is probably your best bet. For now, I would say Solforge is probably number 2 on this list. There's in-client draft and constructed queue tournaments. These are very interesting as you can actually play them around your schedule. You play one round here, one round there. Whenever you're ready, you get to play. So if you are the kind of person who doesn't have 8 hours to go play in a Magic tournament, this actually might be even better for you. And even if you do have a lot of time, there's a lot of community-run tournaments that have been going on, all kinds of different formats. And even Stoneblade themselves have started running Solforge tournaments using their own people. And things look to be only getting better and better in this regard. I would put Hex next. Hex also has in-game tournament structures, and there are also many tournaments that are run outside of the client by community groups. Much like Solforge, they have a larger structure where you can earn points towards an even bigger invitational tournament. Both Solforge and Hex are doing about the same job of having tournament structure and organized play that's on the cusp of great, but currently a little bit underdeveloped, and as it becomes developed, it will be better and better. Now we move on to the more disappointing games in this regard. First, Infinity Wars. There is draft in the client itself, but there don't seem to be many tournaments that are being run. I did a search for Infinity Wars tournaments and I couldn't find anything. Now perhaps I'm just incompetent and wasn't able to locate the tournaments, but I wasn't able to find anything interesting as far as Infinity Wars tournaments, either within the game itself or outside of the game. And last for this category is War of Omens. I mean, it's a new game that seems to be still developing itself as a game. Now there is a ladder, which I was so excited about. I saw, oh my goodness, there's a brand new ladder. I click on it. It's too simple right now. It just tracks very basic things like how many multiplayer wins you have. And you're like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, who's at the top? Oh, that person has 5,000 wins. What does that even mean? Are they 5,000 and whatever? What's their percentage? Do they just sit at their computer all day? War of Omens, War of Omens, War of Omens, and lose half their games? It's very unlikely, but it's still not a very satisfying carrot to put at the end of the stick. It's a carrot, but it's more like a nub of a carrot that looks kind of green and not that tasty. But there's a kernel there, perhaps that will grow into more. Next category is card art. Now for some, this will be critical. For me, this is practically irrelevant. I'm pretty well known for stating that my daughter could provide the art for a game, and if the game was good, I wouldn't care. In fact, if my 5-year-old daughter did the art, I'd probably like the game even better. But for some of you, this may be a pretty important category. For me, Infinity Wars is a pretty clear number one. The first time I loaded up Infinity Wars, that's what struck me, the card art. Having these really cool animations. Now they have Star Trek The Next Generation cards with their animations. The card art in Infinity Wars is really impressive. Number two is War of Omens. The art is somewhat cartoony, but cartoony in a good way, and they're embracing the fact that it's cartoony and it's crisp and well done. I think it's very attractive art. Again, subjective, right? What's attractive to me, you may find to be repulsive. Number three is Solforge. Solforge is a game that I play regularly, and I'm rarely thinking like, oh, that's amazing art. But that's how I am. There aren't a lot of... Your art has to be pretty phenomenal for me to actually take notice. So I would say the art in Solforge is fine. There's some really cool graphics, and some of them are not as cool, and that's fine. Number four is Hex, and again, highly subjective. But for me, Hex has chosen more of the serious path, the serious style of art. You have, orcs and all this very serious art, and then karate rabbits. And it just seems kind of disjointing to me. Some of you may love that. It's a cutesy, cartoony factor that's kind of thrown in. And in something like War of Omens, I would feel like it would fit pretty well with their cartoony art to start with. But with a very serious art, it just feels somewhat out of place. And last for me is Hearthstone. And it's not that Hearthstone has bad card art. That's not it at all. All of these games have done a fine job in creating card art. It's just that they're really small images and these little windows on tiny cards. You can't even really see what the art does anyway. But I will admit, I am kind of a sucker for the golden cards. The animation and the gold flickering and some pointless snow falling down around the guy. You got me. I'm not made of stone, okay? I'm not made of stone. Pretty impressive. Okay, so next up is the supported platforms. And for some of you, this may be the most relevant category of all. Can you even play the game that I'm talking about? That sounds so cool. So number one has got to be Solforge. I mean, Solforge has taken a lot of their research dollars and put it into having it available on many platforms. Do you have a device? Solforge probably runs on it. It runs on PC, Android, iPad, iPhone. I mean, if you ask them nicely, they might put it on the Apple IIe. I don't know. But basically, you can play it on about everything. Hearthstone is next. Hearthstone also can be played on either a Mac or a PC. Now on an iPad. The only thing you can't play it on pretty much is a phone. It'd be pretty tough to play Hearthstone on a phone, I got to admit. Alright, next up is War of Omens. And mainly because War of Omens is a browser game, it's fairly flexible on what you can play it on. I tried to play it on my iPad the other night, and because it doesn't have a high enough Flash browser, I wasn't able to play it. But there's ways to do emulation on iPads. There may actually be a way to get War of Omens to even get going on an iPad. Next is Hex. And Hex is pretty much just for PCs, but at least it's PC. The last place goes to Infinity Wars, which is a PC game that has to be played through Steam. And so it's a little more limiting. Is Steam down? Well, I guess you don't have any options or any ways of playing Infinity Wars. All right, essentially, this is a category that is only relevant in as far as it's relevant to you. Is the supported platform available for you? All right, so this is kind of more of a funsies category where the rankings aren't as firm. But in essence, are there any shocking omissions from these games? And there are. They're all in beta. So there's going to be some hilariously shocking, glaring omission in each of these games. So to me, the most glaring omission is War of Omens. So I started playing it on my stream. Loving the game. So much fun. A bunch of my friends are playing. They're on the stream. Hey, Tiny Grimes, I'm going to take you down. I say, bring it on. Challenge me. Oh. Wait. What? There's no way to challenge a friend? What? Yep, that's true. There is no way to actually challenge a friend in War of Omens right now. If you want to play War of Omens, You are playing the AI, or are you going into the queue? Those are your choices. I did talk to a designer, and they said that is coming in the very near future. So if War of Omens looks good to you, that's the only thing holding you back, don't worry, it is coming. The next most egregious omission, and this might be first, is Hex. Now, playing a Hex draft is really fun. You draft all your cards, but then what happens is after you complete your draft, let's say you have a bye in the first round. I was kind of excited. I got a bye my first time. This is amazing. I get a free win, and I get to look at my deck for an hour while I kind of figure out strategies. No, you absolutely don't. When you are in a tournament, or even waiting for a tournament to queue up, you can do nothing else in Hearthstone. You are stuck staring at the tournament screen. It is probably the most boring thing in the world. It is literally like watching paint dry. Of course, you can bring up another browser, do something else. That's the obvious thing. But it is quite shocking that Hex doesn't have anything to do yet. And again, this is a situation where this is clearly going to be remedied at some point in the near future. Probably before it even comes out of closed beta. In Solforge, for me, the most shocking omission is that there is still, after quite a long time of being in open beta, no way to trade or sell cards. I know this is on the horizon at some point, but this has been very frustrating for some players as they've really wanted, say, that 1 or 2 power cards. Solforge has made great strides into making cards more readily available without that, by introducing a crafting system and a way to buy a card of the day. But it's still, in the end, every day that passes, it's more and more shocking that you can't trade or sell cards. Next for me is Infinity Wars. Infinity Wars has the worst deck builder of any game that I've ever seen. I mean, I've been playing digital type games for a long time, even when they were primitive years ago. This is a terrible deck builder. You can't sort by rarity. There's not many different methods for sorting. Again, this is a situation where I've talked to people and they've assured me that a new deck builder is in the works and it will be out fairly soon. So again, if the deck builder is the only thing causing you not to play Infinity Wars, don't be foolish, play it anyway. And last, Hearthstone, which isn't that surprising because Hearthstone is so well developed and so well polished. It should really be at the end of this list. But there is one huge, shocking situation. Hey, Blizzard, have you heard of new cards? How long do you think you can go before releasing a single new card? So thankfully, there have been some erratas that have happened, and each of them have helped shift the metagame, make it interesting again. But having no new cards for this long is really becoming difficult. For instance, Solforge has put out a major set and 3 smaller sets since Hearthstone has released any new cards. That will be rectified this summer, though, with their new Naxxramas raid, and hopefully it won't just be a couple cards, because to be honest, Hearthstone, it's time to step up and put out a bunch of new cards. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and summarize what my favorite games are. And remember, this really is about as subjective as you can get. What are the games that I enjoy most? And they're for different reasons. So for me, Solforge is the game I enjoy most. And that shouldn't be surprising. I put enough time in it to become one of the top players in the game. I'm obviously dedicated to this game. It is my main digital card game. But to me, the complexity and depth provided by this game are just unparalleled by any of the other games on the market. For me, number 2 is Hearthstone. And that might sound surprising, since I said I like a game with depth. That is the number 1 requirement. Hearthstone lacks depth. But the point is, if I'm already playing Solforge, do I really have time to play 2 games that require extensive amounts of depth? The polish of Hearthstone is amazing, and when I play Hearthstone after a while, I feel like it welcomes me with a warm embrace and gives me like a back massage, and I can go for not playing 3 weeks into a ladder. I know every card will be the same because they don't release new cards, and I can just start right back where I left off. The meta might have a slight shift, but I'm pretty much going to be perfectly fine. War of Omens is another game that for me is my 3rd favorite game right now because, again, it's a quick-hitting, fun format. I can just fire up the War of Omens browser, play 3 games in 10 minutes and go on my merry way. If I wanted to play Solforge, it would take much, much longer. I put Hex fourth, and again, it's not because I don't like Hex. I like Hex a lot. But when I play Hex, I feel like I take a deep breath and start up Hex. This is not a filler game, right? I feel like I'm entering a Shark Tank, and I'm the chum. But because it's demanding of my time, I don't have quite the same level of enjoyment yet because I haven't invested the time yet. And I think if you invest the time into Hex, you will find that it rewards you with complexity and depth. But just because I haven't felt compelled to spend that much time with it yet, it doesn't mean it's not a fun game. It is a fun game. It's just a game that you need to be fairly dedicated to. You can't just walk through the door and be like, entertain me, Hex, I am here. Whereas I feel like Hearthstone and War of Omens, that happens a little bit more. I put Infinity Wars last. And this is highly subjective. It's basically just a really unique game that instead of fully grabbing me, has kind of turned me the other way. And I've said, I'm not really sure I like these really unique mechanics. I haven't spent much time with this game. And it's really the game that I've spent the least amount of time with. I have enjoyed that time, but it hasn't really just drawn me fully in to compel me to spend all day with it, to really explore all the depth that it has to offer. So I'm sure it's a fantastic game. I do enjoy it. It just doesn't go high on my list of games I have the most fun with. Alright, so my final thoughts, that concludes today's Roundup. If you liked what you saw here today, leave me a message on Twitch or comment below on the video. I intend to produce a follow-up Roundup in a few months to explore where these games have gone as they have continued to grow and evolve. So thanks again for tuning in, and keep your eyes peeled for more content from Tiny Grimes Games.